to give our bar today is Joel.
That's the bad news. The good news is that I'm not going to do one of my usual marathons. I have enough to do to show up for this year. I don't need to add to that by inflicting that on anyone this afternoon. Instead, what I wanted to do was to take just a few minutes to ask one simple question about our Parashat for this service, which is Kedoshim. There are a couple of notable things about this portion, and particularly the fact that we're reading it on Yom Kippur afternoon. This portion of Torah is from Leviticus. It's chapters 19 and 20. Right now in the annual cycle, we're near the end of Deuteronomy. We normally read Kedoshim in April or May, so why are we reading it on Yom Kippur? It's also very interesting that Kedoshim is crammed full of mitzvot. There are 51 commandments in this portion. That's more than 4 times as many as the average weekly portion. A couple of days ago on Shabbat Shuvah, we read Parashat Ha'azinu, which has only 1 commandment in it. So the question I want to ask is this. What's with the brain dump of all these specific rules? And in particular, why are we reading them on Yom Kippur afternoon? Parashat Kedoshim, right off the top, says, Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the whole Israelite community and say to them, You shall be holy, for I, your God, Adonai your God, am holy. I'm reminded of the distant past. It would have been 1982, and I was a student at McMaster. I was sitting in a lecture hall on a Friday morning with 200 of my closest friends in a linear algebra class. Our professor was a fellow named Jerry Field. Professor Field was a very nice guy, but he was also the very picture of the old school formal British academic. I'm talking tweed jacket, suede elbow patches, the whole 9 yards. So there we all were. And mind you, it wasn't even 9 in the morning yet. And Professor Field was smoking his pipe, scribbling equations with every letter in the Greek alphabet on a transparency on his overhead projector. I certainly didn't have a very good grasp of what Professor Field was writing on his overhead, and I'm pretty sure I was in good company. Whatever it was arcane and inscrutable. I remember distinctly that at one point, one of my classmates put up his hand and asked, Dr. Field, could you do an example with numbers? I'm sure what he was thinking, because I was thinking the same thing, was, this is really hard and abstract. Can you make it any simpler? Well, the professor stopped what he was doing. He looked up at the guy who asked the question for what seemed like a good long time, like he was legitimately confused by the question. And finally, Dr. Field said, I don't know why you'd want to see it with numbers when it's much more clear with variables. And then he went back to what he was doing and the lecture went on. And my classmates and I all went back to pondering the life choices that had led us to being in a linear algebra class at 8:30 on a Friday morning. So why does Parashat Kedoshim remind me of this episode from my distant and possibly checkered academic past? God tells us that we need to be holy because God themselves is holy. Then God goes on to give a long list of for instances. Some of these seem pretty straightforward, like don't steal and keep the Sabbath. But others are a little less obvious, like don't wear cloth made out of a mixture of 2 kinds of material. I'm not going to go through the whole list of 51 mitzvot, but I will say that one of the commandments in Kedoshim is something that I consider to be one of the most profound statements in all of Torah. And if you want to hear more about that, you can come and talk to me later this afternoon, and I can bend your ear for a whole half hour or more on that subject. But suffice to say that there's a real mixed bag of do's and don'ts in this portion, all under the rubric of you shall be holy, for I, Adonai your God, am holy. So here's the thing I think we should all be thinking about on Yom Kippur afternoon, and why the rabbis thought it was really important for us to pull something out of the middle of Torah and concentrate on it on the Day of Atonement. If you just take this list of 51 things, is that all we actually have to do or not do to be holy like God commands us? If we use fourth-year crops only for sacred purposes and avoid shaving our beards with razors, are we good to go in God's eyes? What if, in a moment of moral weakness, we break down and plant diverse seeds together? What if we called the guy who cut us off driving to shul this morning a nasty name? Have we blown it? In other words, are these specific rules the point? Is that what being a good person means? Are these rules, or even these and all the other 613 rules in Torah, the beginning and the end of what it means to be a good person? How many of these rules do we have to break before we can't be considered a good person anymore? I don't know about you, but I wrestled with this problem for a long time, maybe 40 years or more. If I know that I can't keep all of these rules, and I know that no matter how sorry I am about it and how many times I come to Yom Kippur services and ask for forgiveness, that I'm still not going to be able to keep all of these rules the following year, then what's the point? Being conflicted about this kept me out of shul for decades. But here's what I eventually figured out, and what allows me to be here with you on Yom Kippur afternoon, pondering the question of what it means to be holy the way God commands us to be. As smart as my math professor, Dr. Field, was, and he was dizzyingly smart, he didn't understand something important about us regular people that God clearly does understand. When we're faced with something hard and even abstract, it really helps to see some concrete examples. Take all the Greek letter variables out of the equation and plug in some numbers. So what's the equation? God's telling us right off the top of our parsha, "You shall be holy, for I, Adonai, your God, am holy." Or, if you like, we can use the short form, which I like to call, "Don't be a jerk." Are you cheesed off at your parents about something? Don't be a jerk. Revere your mother and father. Do you have a field full of crops? Don't be a jerk. Leave the corners unharvested so the poor and hungry can get something to eat. Don't give false testimony. Don't bear grudges. Help people when they're in danger. Don't be a jerk. So as we sit here on Yom Kippur thinking really hard about how what we've done in the past year and what we can do to be deserving of God's forgiveness for the coming year, we can see that God is laying it out for us. Not only is he giving us the abstract equation, but he's even filling out the variables with some practical examples to help us understand it. Don't get too hung up on any particular rule. The individual rules are by themselves not the whole point. They're there to illustrate the point, which is, as I've characterized it, don't be a jerk. Be holy, that's the abstract equation. Like all abstract equations, though, it's not always easy to understand what it means for practical purposes in our daily lives. That's what the rules are for. They're the example numbers to fill in the variables and make the abstract easier to understand. Are you struggling with any particular rule? Is it not a helpful example for you in your life? Don't get discouraged by that. Remember that the point is to do your best to be holy the way God wants you to be. That's the abstract equation. Remember, too, that God is compassionate and forgiving to anyone who makes a sincere effort. That's the message of Parashat Kedoshim, and it's the message we should all be thinking about on this Yom Kippur afternoon. Gemar Chatima Tova. May you all be sealed for good in the book of life.